Hi, in this video we will read about approach to respiratory distress in newborn from AIMS and ICU protocol. Let's start. Respiratory distress occurs in 4 to 7% of all the neonates and is the reason for 30 to 40% of all the admissions in the NICU. So it holds a very large percentage, right? 40% is a lot. It is more common among preterm and post-term than among the term neonates. So most of this respiratory distress is in more common in preterm and post-term. A neonate can develop respiratory distress due to various conditions, which are not limited to respiratory or cardiovascular causes alone. Appropriate management includes evaluating the neonate for the severity and the cause of respiratory distress and initiating respiratory support when appropriate. Coming to its definition, the National Neonatal Perinatal Database of India define the respiratory distress as the presence of any two of the following. There is respiratory distress as the presence of any two of the following. One second. That is respiratory rate of more than 60, subcostal or intercostal retractions, expiratory grunt or groaning. So if any two of this is also present, then we call it a respiratory distress. In addition to the above features, the presence of nasal flaring, suprasternal retractions, and decreased air entry on the auscultation of the chest also indicates in the presence of respiratory distress. Fine. So any two of this, or there can also be presence of nasal flaring, suprasternal retractions, decreased air entry on auscultation of chest also indicate the presence of respiratory distress. Gasping, choking, or stridor. Signs of upper airway obstruction. Stridor is a sign of upper airway obstruction, right? And apnea or poor respiratory effort or bradycardia. Poor perfusion and cyanosis are life threatening signs that require prompt interventions. So, what are the life threatening? These are gasping. Let's see what are the life threatening signs: gasping, choking, stridor, apnea, or poor respiratory effort, or bradycardia, poor perfusion, and cyanosis. Okay, so this is what we call respiratory distress. Most importantly, most commonly that we are going to use in our in ICUs and SNCUs are the respiratory rate of more than 60, subcostal or intercostal retractions, recessions, and expiratory grunt or groaning. Now coming to the causes, what are the causes? There's a table that we will read before that. Respiratory distress can occur due to various conditions, and the frequency of given disease depends upon the multiple factors of which gestation is the most important one. Fine, gestation is one of the most important factor which contribute towards the respiratory distress. As in preterm neonates, respiratory distress is the most common cause, while in the late preterm and the term neonates, transient tachypnea of newborn is the predominant cause. Fine. In preterm neonate, what is the most common cause? Respiratory distress syndrome. Preterm neonates, respiratory distress syndrome. And in the late preterm and the term neonate, transient tachypnea of the newborn is the most common cause. Now coming to the common causes of the respiratory distress in newborn. So there are certain airway related causes, there are certain pulmonary diseases, there are cardiac diseases, thoracic causes, neuromuscular diseases, and others. Let's look at these conditions. Airway causes of respiratory distress in newborn are choanal atresia, peri-Robin sequence, tracheoesophageal fistula, laryngotracheomalacia, and vocal cord paralysis. So these are all the airway related conditions. Now, the pulmonary diseases like transient tachypnea of newborn, respiratory distress syndrome, meconium aspiration syndrome, pneumothorax, and other air leak syndrome, persistent pulmonary hypertension of the newborn, pulmonary hypoplasia, lung malformations, congenital diaphragmatic hernia. So, these were all the pulmonary diseases which cause the respiratory distress. In cardiac diseases, there is congenital heart disease, arrhythmia, congestive cardiac failure, and cardiomyopathy. Fine. So these are all the cardiac causes that can cause respiratory distress. What are they? Congenital heart disease can even cause, arrhythmias can cause, congestive cardiac failure can obviously cause, and cardiomyopathy. Now, the thoracic causes like the chest wall deformity or the skeletal dysplasia can also cause respiratory distress. There are certain neuromuscular diseases like the central nervous system damage, as in case of birth trauma or hemorrhage, meningitis, and asphyxia. They can cause respiratory distress. Medications like maternal sedation, narcotic withdrawal, they can cause respiratory distress. Muscular disease like myasthenia gravis can cause respiratory distress, and spinal cord injury can also cause respiratory distress. Other conditions like sepsis, anemia, polycythemia, hypo and hyperthermia, these can also cause respiratory distress. So we have read a lot of causes for respiratory distress under various headings: under airway, under pulmonary diseases, cardiac diseases, thoracic causes, neuromuscular diseases, and others. Moving ahead to the investigation and management. Initial assessment. An initial assessment of the respiratory distress is done to rule out life-threatening conditions which require immediate management, such as inadequate. So what is written here is we have to do an initial assessment and rule out any life-threatening condition. Now we are going to read about the life-threatening condition that we have to rule out, like such as inadequate respiratory efforts or obstructed airway. Okay, as in gasping, choking, stridor, or apnea, or there is circulatory collapse. This is also life-threatening, which we have to rule out, like bradycardia, hypotension, poor perfusion. This is These are all the features of circulatory collapse. If such features are present, emergency measures such as the oxygen administration, bag and mask, ventilation, intubation should be initiated as necessary. Now coming to the general examination. We need to look for the dysmorphic features, craniofacial malformations, features of the intrauterine growth restriction, scaphoid abdomen, and drooling of the saliva. So these conditions, these features that we just read, scaphoid abdomen is seen in congenital diaphragmatic hernia. This drooling of saliva will be seen in that uh, tracheoesophageal fistula. Also, if different kinds of tracheoesophageal fistula are present, right? So yeah, we have to look for these things in general examination. Also note the color of the neonate, pink versus cyanosis, and use the pulse oximeter to determine the oxygen saturation. Now coming to the assessment of respiratory distress. How are we going to assess? First is the inspection. So in inspection, what are we going to see? Observe whether the neonate is breathing comfortably or signs of respiratory distress are present. Some respiratory sounds are audible to the ears without a stethoscope. Stridor is a harsh crowing sound produced by produced due to narrowing of the upper airway at the level of the larynx or the extrathoracic trachea. It is often inspiratory but can be expiratory or biphasic. Stridor can occur in the newborn due to the laryngomalacia. Okay. So yeah, we have to look for any audible sound during inspiration. Any odd sounds are audible, so we have to look for audible sounds. And one of them is stridor. Stridor has a harsh crowing sound produced due to why? It's produced due to narrowing of the upper airway at the level of the larynx or the extra thoracic trachea. It is often inspiratory, mostly stridor. No, it is inspiratory only, but can be expiratory or biphasic also. Stridor can occur in newborn due to laryngomalacia, Peri-Robin sequence, vocal cord palsy, laryngeal or subglottic narrowing due to the edema, web, or stenosis. So these are all the conditions which can cause stridor in a newborn. Second sound that we need to hear while inspection is this grunting. Grunting, no, is an expiratory noise due to the closure of glottis during expiration. Okay, by this mechanism, neonate neonates can increase the functional residual capacity. There is also something called stutter or snorting. It is a low-pitched inspiratory noise produced due to the obstruction at the level of nasopharynx, as in case of adenoid hypertrophy or oropharynx like micrognathia or macroglossia. So that sound which is produced due to macroglossia or micrognathia, that is called as the stutter or snorting. Note the symmetry of the chest excursion and synchrony with the abdominal wall movement. Okay, a rounded chest wall with increased anteroposterior diameter is a marker of hyperinflation. Fine. And pectus carinatum or a pigeon chest deformity may be noted in a chronic condition with an increased respiratory effort that causes the sternum to protrude. So here we have seen some condition. We have seen a rounded chest wall, which has an increased anteroposterior diameter, and which is a marker of what? This rounded chest wall is a marker of hyperinflation. This pectus carinatum or the pigeon chest deformity, it may be noted in chronic condition, which is with an increased respiratory effort that causes what? Sternum to protrude. On the other hand, the pectus excavatum or funnel chest is a developmental deformity wherein the sternum and the costal cartilage are depressed. That is called as the pectus excavatum. Fine. Or also called as the funnel chest, in which there is what? Wherein the sternum and the costal cartilage, they are depressed. So these were all the chest wall abnormalities that might be seen. So firstly, in assessment of respiratory distress, we looked at the first part was inspection. Second part is palpation and percussion. Let's start. While palpation and percussion are done sparingly in neonates, one can get valuable information by feeling the tracheal position, locating the apex beat, palpating for the crepitus or murmurs, and percussion for the normal resonance. Dullness on the percussion may be noted over areas of consolidation or collapse. Stony dullness over the pleural effusion and hyperresonance over pneumothorax or bulla will be seen. We all know this, right, from our practicals that we have already given in MBBS final year. And right. So we know that this all that stony dullness over the pleural effusion and hyperresonance over the pneumothorax is heard on auscultation. What will be seen? Third part is auscultation. So we have to assess whether the breath sounds are heard equally and symmetrically in all the areas, whether there is a prolongation of inspiration or expiratory phase, and the presence of added sounds like whether there is rales, ronchi, wheeze, or stridor. Fine. We have to hear for any added sounds. Now there are respiratory distress scores that we should know. The severity of respiratory distress can be objectively graded using respiratory distress scores. The two commonly used scores are the Silverman-Anderson scores and the Downey's-Vidyasagar score. The signs of the respiratory distress are assigned a numerical value, 0 indicating normal and 2 indicating the worst. The final summary score grades the level of distress into none, score of 0 or mild less than 3, or moderate if the score is between 4 to 6, and severe if the score is more than 7. So this is how we grade the severity of respiratory distress. Using these scores, nurse and the clinicians can monitor the progression of the respiratory distress and initiate optimal treatment. Neonates with the mild to moderate distress can be managed using the positive distending pressure like CPAP, while those with the severe distress may need intubation and mechanical ventilation. So based on that score, we can manage the patient. Like mild and moderate one can be managed by CPAP, while those in the severe distress, that is having more than 7, may need intubation and mechanical ventilation. Now let's read about this respiratory distress score evidence. Silverman score does not include assessment of skin color, breath sound, or tachypnea, but correlates well with the mortality. The Downey score shows a good correlation with the physiological parameters such as pH, AADO2, and PaO2. The score of 7 or more at the age of 24 to 30 hours, when the source is usually at its peak, score is usually at its peak, is associated with higher mortality compared with no mortality when the score is less than 6, sorry. Serial monitoring is more important than one time assessment. In impending respiratory failure, the score can be falsely low due to apnea, poor perfusion, and failure to maintain the body temperature. Okay, so if there is impending respiratory failure, the score can be falsely low due to what? Due to apnea, poor perfusion, and failure to maintain the body temperature. The choice of one score over the other is often based on unit's preference and training received by the healthcare professionals. Now coming to oxygen saturation. Oxygen saturation measured using the pulse oximetry is considered the sixth vital sign. Saturation below 90% indicates hypoxia. It should be checked in the preductal, that is right hand, and postductal side, that is right and the left leg. So right hand is the preductal hand. A pre or postductal difference of more than 5 to 10% indicates probable right to left shunt through the patent ductus arteriosus PDA in the setting of persistent pulmonary hypertension of the newborn. That is PPHN, that is persistent pulmonary hypertension. Central cyanosis is the bluish discoloration of. This is important to know, I guess. Yeah, right. This is important. That if the preductal, that is the saturation in the right hand, and postductal, the saturation in either the left or right leg, a pre and a postductal difference of more than 5 to 10% indicates what? That there is a right to left shunt. That is, blood from the right side of the heart, which is the deoxygenated blood, is getting mixed with left side. That is where the oxygenated blood is present through the patent ductus arteriosus in the setting of there is persistent pulmonary hypertension. So as there is persistent pulmonary hypertension, so the right ventricles, they are finding it hard. Right ventricles, they are finding it hard to pump into this um, pulmonary arteries. Okay, and because of that, there is right to left shunt because it will now uh, pump forcefully. Fine, moving ahead in the setting of persistent pulmonary hypertension of the newborn, that is PPHN. Central cyanosis is the bluish discoloration of the entire body, including the skin, mucous membrane, and the tongue. Okay, right. It is an important indicator of hypoxia. The deoxyhemoglobin level should be at least 2.5 gram per deciliter in the blood for cyanosis to manifest. This is also an important number that we should know. That if the deoxyhemoglobin level is at least 2.5 gram per deciliter in the blood, then only the cyanosis will manifest. Polycythemic neonates with the high hemoglobin may manifest cyanosis when the oxygen saturation is 88%, while anemic neonates may not appear cyanos until the saturation drops below 65%. So the appearance of cyanosis is also related to the amount of hemoglobin in the baby. Okay. Hence, pulse oximeter is an essential tool to identify hypoxia. Peripheral cyanosis can be due to cold exposure, polycythemia, or potentially serious condition like hypoglycemia, sepsis, decreased left ventricular output like hypoplastic left heart syndrome, or the coarctation of aorta. So these can all be the causes of peripheral cyanosis. Let's read it again. Peripheral cyanosis can be due to cold exposure, polycythemia, or potentially serious condition like hypoglycemia, sepsis, or decreased left ventricular output like hypoplastic left heart syndrome or coarctation of aorta. The uses and the limitations of the pulse oximetry are listed below. So, for diagnosis, it can be used. Pulse oximetry is the best tool for the continuous and non-invasive diagnosis of hypoxia. The normal range of the SpO2 at the sea level is 97 to 99% with a lower limit of 94%. Hypoxia is considered in neonates if the SpO2 is less than 90%. Okay. Grading the severity of the hypoxic respiratory failure. The oxygen saturation index provides non invasive and continuous monitoring of the oxygenation status. It is calculated as the MAP into FiO2 divided by SpO2, that is mean arterial pressure, into FiO2 divided by SpO2. OSI correlates well with the oxygenation index. Now, diagnosis of PPHN. Preductal, postductal oxygen saturation difference of more than 5% and a labile oxygen saturation should raise the suspicion of PPHN. This is also important that when should we suspect PPHN? When the preductal and the postductal oxygen saturation difference is more than 5% and a labile oxygen saturation should raise the suspicion of this PPHN. Screening of critical congenital heart disease in neonates. Universal pre-discharge pulse oximetry screening reduces early cardiac deaths due to the critical congenital heart disease by one third. Fine. Screening of critical congenital heart disease in neonates. Universal pre-discharge pulse oximetry screening reduces early cardiac deaths due to the critical congenital heart disease by one third. Okay. And the screening is done at 24 hours of the age before hospital discharge. Saturations are recorded in the right hand, which is preductal one, and either leg, that is postductal. Saturation of at least 95% on both the sides and a difference of 3% or less between the two readings is considered as PASS. A saturation less than 90% on any side mandates immediate assessment, while intermediate values need retesting. Now, what are the limitations of pulse oximetry? Not a good tool to detect hyperoxia, as SpO2 reading above 95% may occur with a PaO2 values of 80 to 300 mm of Hg, sigmoidal oxygen dissociation curve, not reliable below SpO2 of less than 70%, ambient light dyshemoglobinemia, methemoglobin, and carboxyhemoglobin, low peripheral perfusion states, and movement of the limbs interfere with the measurement. Okay, so yeah, these all things are which interfere with the measurement, like how is the light and this hemoglobinemia and low peripheral perfusion states and the movement. Even when the children move, even when the neonates move, that also interfere with the measurements, right? Coming to the cardiac examination now. Examination of the respiratory system is incomplete without simultaneous assessment of the cardiac system. Neonates with the cardiac disease who manifest tachypnea without significant retractions may have poor perfusion. Okay, so neonates with cardiac disease who manifest only tachypnea without any retractions, they may have poor perfusion, cyanosis, and abnormal heart sounds or murmurs on auscultation. So this table shows the difference in manifestation between the respiratory and cardiac disorders. Monitor the pulse rate, blood pressure, and capillary refill time to identify the hypoperfusion. Secondary to prolonged hypoxemia. There is something called hyperoxia test. It's a simple bedside test used to distinguish the cyanotic heart disease from the pulmonary disease. The arterial blood gas is obtained when the neonate receives room air. Okay. What is written here? That the when is the arterial blood gas is done when the neonates receive the room air, and while on 100% FiO2 for 10 minutes. Neonates with the cyanotic heart disease do not have an increase in the partial pressure of O2 above 100 mm of Hg after 100% oxygen administration. Okay, fine. So now we are done. Now let's read all the tables and the graphs that were left. First, let's start with this only. So, how are we going to differentiate between the respiratory and the cardiac disorders in the newborn? Respiratory and the cardiac disorders. Okay. So, respiratory disorder, what will be the clinical finding? If a neonate is having a respiratory disorder, there will be cyanosis, there will be retractions, the normally split second heart sound. Liver may be pushed down with the lung hyperexpansion, but the liver span will be normal. Okay. And if there is a cardiac disorder, cyanosis will be present. There can be gallop rhythm or murmur, effortless tachypnea or mild distress, single heart sound, large liver when associated with cardiac failure. Okay. In the X-ray, there will be normal heart size, abnormal pulmonary parenchyma such as total whiteout or patches of the consolidation in the pneumonia, fluid in the fissures, in the transient tachypnea of newborn or the ground glass, and appearance in the RDS. Right. So this all will be the X-ray findings. If there is respiratory cause of the distress happening in the newborn. Okay. So what will be seen? There will be total whiteout or patches of consolidation seen in pneumonia. There will be fluid in the fissures in the transient tachypnea, or a ground glass appearance will be seen in the respiratory distress syndrome. In CVS, cardiac disorders, there will be cardiomegaly, decreased pulmonary vascularity and a normal cardiac size, pulmonary oligemia. The blood flow to the pulmonary circulation is decreased due to the right ventricular outflow obstruction with an associated right to left shunt. Okay, so what is happening here basically? Because there is decreased vascularity, decreased pulmonary vascularity, and normal cardiac size will be seen. That shows that there is decreased blood supply to the lungs, and the blood flow to the pulmonary circulation is decreased. Why there is decreased blood supply to the lungs? Due to decreased uh, ventricular outflow, because of the obstruction which is with an associated right to left shunt. So basically, there is pulmonary oligemia, there is a decrease in the blood supply to the lungs because of this right ventricular outflow obstruction, which is associated with right to left shunt. Increased pulmonary vascularity due to, there can be these two findings can be seen: pulmonary oligemia, that in which there is decreased pulmonary vascularity, and there can be increased pulmonary vascularity also due to left to right shunt. Why this pulmonary oligemia was happening? Due to this was associated with right to left shunt, okay, and increased pulmonary vascularity is associated with left to right shunt. That is, blood is going from the left ventricle to the right ventricle, or left atrium to the right atrium. And in cyanotic lesions such as transposition of the great vessels or the total anomalous pulmonary venous return. Blood gas analysis: if there is respiratory cause, no, there will be increase in the partial pressure of CO2 and decreased partial pressure of O2. In a cardiac, if there is a cardiac cause, there will be normal partial pressure of CO2 and decreased PO2. However, PaCO2 may be raised with the pulmonary congestion or an associated lung infection. Hyperoxia test, that is, PaO2 will be more than 150 mm of Hg except in the severe persistent pulmonary hypertension, and in cardiac causes PaO2 will be less than 150 mm of Hg. Okay, so now why is this happening? Why in the hyperoxia test partial pressure of O2 is more than 150 mm of Hg if there is a respiratory cause? Because see, in hyperoxia test we are giving 100% oxygen. One second. We are giving 100% oxygen for 10 minutes, and then an arterial blood gas is done. So after giving it for 10 minutes, in respiratory distress, blood is still passing through the lungs, and the main problem is that alveoli are poorly ventilated or partially collapsed. So when we give 100% oxygen, alveolar oxygen tension, it rises, and more oxygen diffuses into the blood. So partial pressure of oxygen rises, and comes to more than 150 mm of Hg, because lungs are still capable of oxygenation. But in cardiac causes, what is happening? Like in cardiac causes like TOF, let's take for example. These conditions have right to left shunt. Blood bypasses the lungs and goes directly into the systemic circulation. In other conditions like transposition of great arteries also, so giving 100% oxygen cannot oxygenate the blood that never reaches the alveoli only, right? Or if there is any mixing of blood from the right to left, or left to right to left only, then there is mixing of blood, no? So how can the uh, pressure reach this more than 150? So that's why partial pressure of O2 rises, but only slightly, and usually it remains less than 150 mm of Hg. Okay, so this was the principle behind this. This is the hyperoxia test. Let's read it once. Hyperoxia test and its interpretation. Obtain the right radial preductal arterial blood gas PO2 measurement while breathing the room air. Repeat the test when the neonate receiving 100% oxygen for 5 to 10 minutes using an oxyhood, CPAP, or a ventilator based on the respiratory support. Partial pressure of the O2 of more than 250 mm of Hg, then test is passed. Excludes the fixed intracardiac right to left shunt lesions like primary pulmonary disease. If the partial pressure of O2 is between 100 to 250 mm of Hg, then the test is failed. Possible cardiac disease with a good mixing and increased pulmonary blood flow, like obstructive TAPVC. But if the partial pressure of O2 is less than 100 mm of Hg, then the test is failed. Possible critical structure cyanotic heart disease. So this was all about this video. We will read the management in the next part. Thank you.